Namaste friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about a scenario that sounds like a blockbuster movie script, but it is actually happening in real life. Imagine a world where the United States says, Tata, bye-bye, to Europe. For 70 years, America has been like a big brother protecting Europe, but now the mood in Washington is changing fast. We are seeing headlines about America first, trade wars, and threats to pull out of NATO. So what happens if the European Union is left alone without the USA? Will Europe survive? Will Russia take over? And most importantly, what does this mean for our Bharat? Grab your chai, sit back, and let's decode this massive geopolitical drama together. First, let's understand the big brother relationship. Since World War II, the US has been the security guarantor for Europe. They formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949 to protect against the Soviet Union. The deal was simple: an attack on one is an attack on all. This is called Article 5. But recently, especially with the rise of Donald Trump and his America First policy, this guarantee is shaking. Trump has openly called NATO obsolete and warned that if European countries do not pay their bills, the US might not protect them. In fact, reports say he wants NATO allies to spend at least 5% of their GDP on defense, which is a huge jump from the current 2% target. Now imagine the panic in London, Paris, and Berlin. For decades, Europe spent money on welfare and good lives because America was spending on guns and tanks to protect them. But now the US national security strategy is warning that Europe is facing civilizational erasure and needs to stand on its own feet. This is a huge wake-up call. The European leaders are realizing they cannot rely on Uncle Sam anymore. As a survey showed, only 6% of Western Europeans think the US is a very reliable guarantor of security for the next decade. That is a trust deficit of massive proportions. This brings us to the hottest topic right now, the Russia-Ukraine war. This war has exposed how dependent Europe is on America. The US has donated 64 billion euros in military aid to Ukraine, which is more than half of all military aid received by Kyiv. But now, there is a fear that the US might cut this aid. Trump has criticized the endless funding and wants a quick deal to end the war, even if it means negotiating directly with Putin. This has sent shock waves through Europe. Leaders like French President Emmanuel Macron and German officials are terrified that the US might make a deal with Russia behind their backs. The EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas explicitly said any quick fix is a dirty deal. If the US pulls out, Europe simply does not have the military capacity or the money to support Ukraine alone against the Russian war machine. They are scrambling to find money, even looking at seizing frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine, but it is a legal and economic mess. So, what is Europe's plan B? They call it strategic autonomy. This is a fancy term that means we need to handle our own business. French President Emmanuel Macron is leading this charge. He famously said, "Our Europe today is mortal and it can die." He is pushing for Europe to build its own defense capabilities so they don't have to beg Washington for help. There is even talk of a European nuclear deterrent. Since the UK left the EU, France is the only nuclear power in the bloc. Macron has said France is ready to open discussions about stationing nuclear weapons in other European countries to protect them. This is huge, friends. We are talking about a militarized Europe, something we haven't seen in a long time. Germany, which was hesitant to spend on military, has set up a €100 billion fund to modernize its army. But the problem isn't just guns and missiles, it is also about trade. And here the story gets even spicier. You might think US and Europe are best friends, but in the world of business, they are becoming rivals. The US has threatened reciprocal tariffs. Basically, Trump says the EU treats America very badly on trade and creates a trade deficit. He has threatened a 20% tariff on EU goods and even higher on specific items. Imagine German cars or French wine becoming super expensive in America. The EU is not sitting quiet. They have vowed to respond firmly and have prepared a list of countermeasures. They are targeting iconic American goods like bourbon whiskey and blue jeans. It's a tit-for-tat for tat trade war. The EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said they are preparing to retaliate if negotiations fail. Although there have been some pauses in these tariffs to allow for talks, the tension is very high. Europe feels squeezed because the US is adopting protectionist policies like the Inflation Reduction Act, which gives subsidies to American companies, hurting European manufacturers. Now, let's bring India into this picture. How does a lonely Europe affect us? Actually, it opens up a lot of doors for India. As Europe realizes it cannot depend on the US and wants to de-risk from China, they are looking at New Delhi with big hopeful eyes. The EU has unveiled a new strategic EU-India agenda. They want to finalize a free trade agreement with India by the end of 2025. Why? Because they need a massive market like India to replace what they might lose in China or the US. India is already the EU's second largest trading partner after the US. We are seeing more engagement on technology, defense, and green energy. For example, the EU-India Trade and Technology Council is working on semiconductors and AI. France in particular has become India's new Russia in Europe, a go-to partner for defense like Rafale jets and submarines. But friends, it is not all smooth sailing. There is a big elephant in the room, Russia. Europe is obsessed with the Ukraine war. They see Russia as an existential threat. But India has a long-standing friendship with Russia and buys Russian oil and military equipment. This annoys Europe a lot. The EU ambassador to India recently said there is a Russia question in our relationship and criticized India for buying Russian oil and participating in military exercises like Zapad with Russia. EU officials have even threatened sanctions on Indian companies that re-export Russian oil products. But India has stood its ground. Our External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar gave a strong reply, saying Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems. We have pointed out the hypocrisy. Europe itself still buys energy and resources from Russia while lecturing us. Despite these differences, Europe needs India. They know they cannot alienate the world's largest democracy. That is why they are trying to be more pragmatic and transactional. They are realizing that in a multipolar world, they cannot just give orders, they have to make deals. So, to summarize, a lonely Europe without the USA is a Europe that is scared, militarizing, and looking for new friends. The transatlantic bridge is cracking. The US is looking inward or towards China, leaving Europe to fend for itself against Russia. This is leading to a fragmentation of the global order. For India, this is a golden opportunity. We can champion strategic autonomy not just for ourselves, but as a model for the world. We can be the bridge between the North and South. We can get better trade deals from a desperate Europe and technology transfers from the US. But we must be careful. As the old saying goes, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. A trade war between the US and EU will hurt the global economy, including us. We need to strengthen our own manufacturing, diversify our exports, and ensure we are not overly dependent on any single bloc. The next few years are going to be a roller coaster. Will Europe unite and become a superpower, or will it crumble under pressure? Will the US actually walk away from NATO? These are history-defining moments, my friends. We are watching the end of the post-World War II order and the birth of something new. India is right in the center of this game, holding its cards close to its chest. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into geopolitics, smash that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, do you think Europe can survive without the USA? And should India side with Europe or stay neutral? Until next time, Jai Hind.